Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But as the Prime Minister agonises over our plans for post-Brexit customs arrangement, here on the Sunday Politics, we're always happy to offer some advice. So, we've lined up not one, but two Conservative big beasts who are keen to give the Prime Minister the benefit of their experience. In a moment, we'll speak to the pro-European former Chancellor Ken Clarke, who's in Nottingham. But first, let's get the thoughts of the former Conservative leader and Brexiteer, Iain Duncan Smith. Thank you very much for coming in.
Morning.
Crazy, cretinous, silly. These are how some of your colleagues have described the idea of a new customs partnership, which we believe to be the Prime Minister's preferred option. How would you describe it?
Before I do, can I just say how sad I was today to hear
Yes, of course.
Tessa Giles' death. I thought her speech in the House of Lords was very moving, and I think, interestingly, took death, the final enemy, into a kind of honourable escape, and I will miss her enormously. She was a kind and decent person.
And we'll be talking more about her later.
So,
in the
on the
programme.
words,
Thanks for that. Yes. So, crazy, cretinous, or silly? How would you describe the new customs partnership?
Well, I think I'd take a pace back from what I call kind of emotive languages and just ask the question about what we want to do. Now, everyone says Theresa May, the Prime Minister, has a chosen option. I actually don't believe she does. I think she presented the two options, but she wants to get three things done. One, to have as frictionless a border as possible. Two, to solve the Northern Ireland issue, so there isn't a problem with Northern Ireland. And three, to be able to do the trade deals. So getting those three elements right, I think, is the critical issue.
But not easy.
Well, it's not easy, and there's another element to it, which I think is the real deciding factor. It's how complex is either of these solutions to implement in the time given. And my view about them is very simple. The one that's sort of the Max Fac, what a horrible name that is for anything, but the Max Fac idea is about basically enhancing the existing borders for non-EU trade and making them smoother and faster as they are. This is already now taking place in Switzerland. So this technology is already happening in other countries and other borders. And in fact, the European Parliament has urged Europe to do exactly this. And they say this
But you know there's a fundamental problem with the fact that the technology doesn't exist to make trade completely frictionless like that yet. And we've heard Simon Coveney, the Irish Taoiseach, just again this morning saying the Max Fac solution, as currently proposed, will not solve the question of having no infrastructure on the Irish border.
Well, I don't agree with him. And I think he and the European Union have been playing a really rather poor political game over the Northern Ireland border. He knows full well in private that what they are seeking to achieve is achievable with regards to Northern Ireland. There's a very small amount of trade crosses the border. I think about 2 to 3% of Ireland's whole export trade crosses the Northern Ireland border. They have for years already...
But during the process, you've got agricultural products, manufactured products going back and forward before they're exported all the time across
Yes, you do, but my point is that's the whole point about what is being proposed. So there are the two elements, this is the point I wanted to make. Which is the one that would be simpler to implement ultimately, get you to your point of departure and still be able to be enhanced further, or what is a complete new design? And the problem I have with the customs partnership, it is a complete new design. And I have the scars on my back from seeing how governments implement new designed technical systems. It's really a nightmare. And they won't be able to do it within the time. And I wonder if they'll ever be able to do it. So my question really is, you should settle on what is an enhancement and go on enhancing it for practical reasons rather than trying to create something new. Civil service are always proposing new things to you, and you should always say, hold on, I don't like that if it's new unless it's been done somewhere else, and I think that's what I would go. So the practical elements, I think, are the deciding features of how I would choose to go with this.
If the Prime Minister doesn't agree with you and comes down on the side of something like a new customs partnership, what would be the consequences within the parliamentary party? What would you and your more Eurosceptic colleagues do at that point?
Well, I don't speak for anybody else in the party. I have given the Prime Minister my full support. I continue to give her my full support. See, she's written an article today saying, trust me. I do trust her. I trust her to try and get the best system through. And I genuinely believe when it comes to push comes to shove, she'll settle on what is actually achievable rather than what people might hope would be achievable. And that, to my mind, is a bigger issue than whether or not you think you should stay in the customs union or not. It's what can we achieve in the timescales available, do that. And I'm convinced as a practical individual, and she is essentially practical, she will settle on that. But You know,
But there's another problem, isn't there, which is the parliamentary arithmetic. Whatever the Prime Minister and the Cabinet go for, she can't necessarily get through the House of Commons. We've got amendments to the Trade and Customs Bill asking to stay in some form of customs partnership, and it's possible there are enough Tory Remain rebels that the House of Commons will take a very different decision. What happens then?
Well, I would just say to my colleagues who might think of voting against on this particular area of the customs union, which is what's coming back from the Lords right now, is that they really need to think very carefully about this, because the Prime Minister hasn't just made it clear in the past, she made it clear again this Sunday in the Sunday Times that she is for leaving the customs union. It was in the manifesto, and all my colleagues stood on that. So this is a very big issue if they're deciding to break this, because they do literally plunge a knife into the heart of government, and particularly to the Prime Minister, because it is very much her fixed view, and that is what we stood on at the last election.
So if some of your Tory colleagues were to rebel on that and vote in favour of a customs union, would they be putting Theresa May's premiership in jeopardy?
Well, I think everybody risks it because we don't have a majority. So the risk that they take is staring across the floor of the House at them right now, which is somebody who himself says he's in favour of leaving, which is Jeremy Corbyn, and doesn't want to have any truck with staying in things like the single market. So they're likely to do a deal with, as far as they're concerned, even the devil on this one. And I simply argue to them that we made a pledge we would leave the customs union. Surely the purpose of the Conservative Party, which is immensely practical generally, you know, all my colleagues, etc., I get on very well with them, get the job done and do it in the least difficult and frictionless way that you can. It's not going to be completely friction-free, because it won't be, but it's achievable, and we should get behind it and get it to do that.
Iain Duncan Smith, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Now, Ken Clarke's in Nottingham, and he was listening to all of that. You're plotting to do a deal with the devil, is the accusation, Ken Clarke.
I didn't hear that in those terms. The main aim that I think I'm pursuing, certainly, is to do the minimum amount of damage to our trade, our investment, our jobs, our prosperity, and also to stick to the agreements we have with the Irish, every section of Irish opinion, and with the United States, actually, in the Good Friday Agreement. And obviously, so far as we can, we want no new costs, obstacles put in place for our trade, our supply lines, for our manufacturing industry, and we have to have something that achieves that. And if you're not having the customs union, you have a customs arrangement that means there are no new barriers put in place. Insofar as you put any barriers in place, you make people, future generations will find the economy's been damaged and they're less prosperous than they otherwise would have been.
But what Iain Duncan Smith was just talking about there was, rather than the ideological differences that may exist within the Tory party, was something quite practical. He was saying you would need to build such an infrastructure for the new customs partnership that it simply cannot be done in the time available and may not be practical to do at all.
Well, actually, I would say that's a much stronger case against the alternative, which the Eurosceptics at a very late stage, the Brexiteers, appear to have adopted. I mean, there is no technology that allows an open border with different customs, with certificates of origin, with different regulations on either side of the border. It doesn't exist. The Swiss are talking about it, but it doesn't exist. And Ian's own experience, when he thought universal credit could be introduced in 2 or 3 years with all singing modern digital technology, I think should make him cautious.
Well, yes, he said he wore the stars on his back from trying to do that, which is why he doesn't think that
so he shouldn't advocate a solution which doesn't exist anywhere in the world. Every country in the world would have open borders if we could maintain our separate arrangements without having to check any of the lorries at the border or having any paperwork behind it. And when somebody invents that, then it might be worth looking at. But I think actually what you're talking about in the real world is an arrangement which keeps, so far as possible, frictionless trade, which means no bureaucracy, no checking lorries at the border and all the rest of it. And if this partnership can be devised, and it's a policy thing, it doesn't have technology particularly in it. There's quite a bureaucracy involved, I fear. But if this partnership arrangement can be devised so it actually produces no unnecessary new barriers to trade, investment and supply lines, then I personally would be prepared to settle for that. But
Well, 'cause at the
settling is not
moment
in
you
the
have-
minds of the hardline Brexiteers, who I think some of them are trying to undermine the Prime Minister because they want to replace her. But that is a bit of a
that's an
sideshow at the
interesting
moment.
accusation, because they would actually throw that back at you. You're one of the Tory MPs who have signed an amendment to the Trade and the Customs Bill asking to stay in a form of customs union. And the accusation is that it is by threatening to rebel against the Prime Minister that you're putting her in jeopardy.
Well, that's one of the weaker arguments they use against the amendment. We already have defeated the government, I'm sorry we had to, on the question that Parliament must have a vote on the final arrangement. Nobody demanded Theresa's resignation the next day. There is not the slightest prospect of her resigning. The Brexiteers try to bully her by saying they'll get a vote of confidence. They'll put in their 40-odd letters. Well, they can put in their 40-odd letters. She will win a vote of confidence. They can't remove her.
But this would be a very
And
different
they can't-
matter if she lost the
they
vote in
can't
the
force
Commons on this.
Sorry?
If she lost the vote in the Commons on a customs union, she stood and you stood on a manifesto which said that we were leaving the single market in the customs union. If Parliament tries to reverse that and keep this government in some form of customs union, then surely the Prime Minister couldn't survive that.
The election manifesto was produced halfway through the campaign. I have never received a copy of it. None of my constituents read it. Most of it was abandoned during the campaign, and quite a lot else has been abandoned since. The actual referendum campaign had Brexiteers going it was the politics of fear to say they were going to put any new barriers in the way of our trade in investment. They did not emphasise the single market. They actually said, oh, the Germans have to sell us their Mercedes, the Italians have to sell us their Prosecco, trade will carry on as usual,
But
and
since
investment
the
will
referendum, the
flow.
Prime Minister has repeated many times in important speeches that we're leaving the customs union. To try and force her to change her mind on that would do great damage to her government, would it not, and ultimately your party?
Well, the compromise she suggests, and I'm open to persuasion myself, unlike the hardliners on the other side, is that she is against the customs union. So we're going to change. She talks about a customs arrangement, and she now talks about a customs partnership. And she is putting forward the idea that we can modify what we have so that we can, if we want, have trade deals with the outside world, but still keep the free and open border. We have to have it in Ireland. We're not going to have a border down the Irish Sea, so the arrangements in Ireland are going to be the same in Dover and Holyhead, which would actually save us having the lorry parks or the queues down the motorway at Dover, and it would also save us from finding somewhere to put the lorry parks in Holyhead.
All right, well, Ken Clarke, thanks very much for talking to us this morning.